The pituitary gland is a pea-sized structure just below the hypothalamus. The pituitary gland is only about 1/3 of an inch in diameter, that is about as large as a pea, and located at the base of the brain. It is attached with hypothalamus via nerve fibers. Since their functions are so intertwined, therefore, the hypothalamus and pituitary are located near each other. They are connected by the pituitary stalk, also known as the infundibulum. The pituitary gland consists of two parts, often called lobes, a front part called the anterior pituitary and a back part called the posterior pituitary. The pituitary gland sits in a bony hollow called the pituitary fossa. This is behind the bridge of the nose and below the base of the brain, close to the optic nerves. It is often considered the most important part of the endocrine system because it produces hormones that control many functions of other endocrine glands. The anterior lobe of the pituitary gland produces and releases hormones. The posterior lobe does not produce hormones per se. This is done by nerve cells in the hypothalamus, but it does release them into the circulation. The anterior lobe is mainly involved in development of the body, sexual maturation and reproduction. Hormones produced by the anterior lobe regulate growth and stimulate the adrenal and thyroid glands as well as the ovaries and testes. It also generates prolactin, which enables new mothers to produce milk by mammary glands. There is a small, not fully demarcable third lobe called intermediate lobe is present in pituitary lobe. The intermediate lobe of the pituitary gland releases a hormone that stimulates the melanocytes cells which control pigmentation, like skin color, through the production of melanin. The posterior lobe produces antidiuretic hormone which reclaims water from the kidneys and conserves it in the bloodstream to prevent dehydration. Oxytocin is also produced by the posterior lobe, aiding in uterine contractions during childbirth and stimulating the production and release of milk from mammary glands. The pituitary gland lies at the middle of the base of the skull and is housed within a bony structure called the sella truncaria, which is behind the nose and immediately beneath the hypothalamus. The pituitary gland is attached to the hypothalamus by a stalk composed of neural axons and the so-called hypophyseal portal veins. Its weight in normal adult humans ranges from about 500 to 900 milligrams. In most species, the pituitary gland is divided into three lobes: the anterior lobe, the intermediate lobe and the posterior lobe, also called the neurohypophyses or pars nervosa. In humans, the intermediate lobe does not exist as a distinct anatomic structure, but rather remains only as cells dispersed within the anterior lobe. Nonetheless, the anterior and posterior lobes of the pituitary are functionally, anatomically and embryologically distinct. Whereas the anterior pituitary contains abundant hormone secreting epithelial cells, the posterior pituitary is composed largely of unmyelinated cells lacking a sheath of fatty insulation secretory neurons. The anterior pituitary adenohypophysis. The cells of the anterior pituitary are embryologically derived from an outpouching of the roof of the pharynx, known as Rathke's pouch. Although the cells appear to be relatively homogeneous under a light microscope, there are in fact at least 5 different types of cells, each of which secrete a different hormone. The thyrotropes synthesize and secrete thyrotropin, thyroid stimulating hormone TSH, while the gonadotropes of anterior pituitary gland secrete luteinizing hormone LH and follicle stimulating hormone FSH. The corticotropes release adrenocorticotropic hormone ACTH, also called as corticotropin. The somatotropes growth hormone GH, somatotropin, and the lectotrope secrete prolactin. Somatotropes are plentiful in the anterior pituitary gland, consisting about 40% of the tissue. They are located predominantly in the anterior and the lateral regions of the gland and secrete between 1 and 2 milligrams of growth hormone each day. The posterior pituitary, the neurohypophysis. The posterior lobe of the pituitary gland consists largely of extensions of processes, axons, from two pairs of large clusters of nerve cell bodies, nuclei, in the hypothalamus. One of these nuclei, known as the supraoptic nuclei, lies immediately below the optic tract, while the other nuclei, known as the paraventricular nuclei, lies on each side of the third ventricle of the brain. These nuclei, the axons of the cell bodies of nerves that form the nuclei, and the nerve endings in the posterior pituitary gland form the neurohypophyseal system. There are neural connections that run from these nuclei to other regions of the brain, including the regions that sense osmolality, solute concentrations, and regulate thirst. Structure and functions of anterior pituitary hormones. In response to hormonal messages from the hypothalamus, the anterior pituitary gland releases the following 6 hormones. GH, growth hormone, increases size of muscle and bones. TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, stimulates the thyroid gland to release T3 and T4 to stimulate metabolism in other cells throughout the body. FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, stimulates ovarian follicle production in women, stimulates sperm production in men. LH, luteinizing hormone, stimulates ovaries to produce estrogens in women, stimulates sperm production in men. Prolactin, stimulates breast tissue in nursing mothers to produce milk. ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, causes the adrenal glands to produce important substances that have properties similar to steroids. The hormones of the anterior pituitary are proteins that consist of 1 or 2 long polypeptide chains. TSH, LH, and FSH are called glycoproteins because they contain complex carbohydrates known as glycosides. Each of these hormones is composed of 2 glycopeptide chains, one of which is alpha chain, is identical in all 3 hormones. The other chain, the beta chain, differs in structure for each hormone, thereby explaining the different actions of TSH, LH, and FSH. As is the case for all protein hormones, the hormones of the anterior pituitary are synthesized in the cytoplasm of cells as large inactive molecules called prohormones. These prohormones are stored in granules, within which they are cleaved into active hormones and are secreted into the circulation. Each pituitary hormone plays a vital role in endocrine functions. Thyrotropin stimulates the production of thyroid hormone. ACTH stimulates the production of cortisol and androgenic hormones by the adrenal cortex. FSH stimulates the production of estrogens and the growth of egg cells, oocytes, in the ovaries in women and sperm cells in the testes in men. LH stimulates the production of estrogens and progesterone by the ovaries in women, and production of testosterone by the testes in men. GH stimulates linear growth in children and helps to maintain bone and other tissues in adults. Prolactin stimulates milk production from mammary glands. Structure and functions of posterior pituitary hormones. In response to electrical messages from the hypothalamus, the posterior pituitary gland releases the neurohypophyseal hormones. The major neurohypophyseal hormones are vasopressin, antidiuretic hormone, and oxytocin, which are synthesized and incorporated into neurosecretory granules in the cell bodies of the nuclei. These hormones are synthesized as part of a precursor protein that includes one of the hormone and a protein called neurophysin. After synthesis and incorporation into neurosecretory granules, the precursor protein is cleaved, forming separate hormone and neurophysin molecules, which remain loosely attached to one another. These granules are carried through the axons and are stored in posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. Upon stimulation of the nerve cells by internal or external events like breast suckling in case of oxytocin secreting neurons, the granules fuse with the myelin sheath of the nerve endings. The hormone and neurophysin dissociated from one another, and both the hormone and the neurophysin are released into the bloodstream. The hormones are released into the circulation in response to nerve signals that originate in the hypothalamus and are transmitted to the posterior pituitary lobe. Oxytocin stimulates contraction of uterus, an important aspect of labor and parturition and of milk ejection during breastfeeding. Vasopressin raises blood pressure and increases reabsorption of water from the kidneys, thus conserving body water and defending against dehydration. Vasopressin secretion is stimulated by decreased serum osmolality, which is an indication of dehydration. The production and secretion of each of the major anterior pituitary hormones are regulated by peptides that are released from the median eminence neurons of the hypothalamus into the hypophyseal portal veins, which traverse a short distance to the pituitary microvasculature. Among these peptides are thyrotropin releasing hormone TRH, corticotropin releasing hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone, and growth hormone releasing hormone. The hypothalamus also produces dopamine and somatostatin, which are potent inhibitors of prolactin and GH respectively. A pituitary disease is a disorder primarily affecting the pituitary gland. Overproduction or underproduction of a pituitary hormone will affect the respective end organ. Pituitary gland disorders can affect many different parts of the body. Conditions such as acromegaly, Cushing's syndrome, hypothyroidism, and hypogonadism all may result from pituitary gland disease. Some of the diseases involving the pituitary gland are hyperpituitarism, the increased hypersecretion of one or more of the hormones normally produced by the pituitary gland. Hypopituitarism, the decreased hyposecretion of one or more of the hormones normally produced by the pituitary gland. Central diabetes insipidus, caused by a deficiency of vasopressin. Gigantism and acromegaly, caused by an excess of growth hormone in childhood and adult respectively. Hypothyroidism, caused by a deficiency of thyroid stimulating hormone. released from anterior pituitary. Panhypopituitarism is the decreased secretion of the most of the anterior and posterior pituitary hormones, a serious and sometimes fatal disorder. Pituitary tumors are the most common problems with the pituitary gland occurs when a benign tumor, also called a adenoma, develops in gland. Pituitary apoplexy or pituitary tumor apoplexy is bleeding into or impaired blood supply of the pituitary gland at the base of the brain. The pituitary gland is important for mediating the stress response via the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal HP axis. Critically, pituitary gland growth during adolescence can be altered by early life stress such as childhood, maltreatment or maternal dysphoric behavior. The pituitary is an endocrine gland of pea size and weighing about 0.5 grams in humans. It is a protrusion of the bottom of the hypothalamus at the base of the brain. As the master gland of the body, it produces many hormones that travel throughout the body. Hormones secreted from the pituitary gland help control growth, blood pressure, certain functions of the sex organs, thyroid glands and metabolism, as well as some aspects of pregnancy, childbirth, nursing, water and salt concentrations and the kidneys, temperature regulation and pain relief. The pituitary gland makes or stores many different hormones. While anterior pituitary gland secretes growth hormone GH, thyroid stimulating hormone TSH, adrenocorticotropic hormone ACTH, prolactin and gonadotropins LH and FSH. The posterior pituitary releases antidiuretic hormone ADH, also known as vasopressin and arginine vasopressin AVP and oxytocin. Pituitary gland disorders can affect many different parts of the body. Conditions such as acromegaly, Cushing's syndrome, hypothyroidism and hypogonadism may result from pituitary gland disease and malfunctions.